Hello and welcome to yet another Pauper deck tech. Finally, again, I get to say this sentence as I found some free time. Even though I have now officially started my bachelor thesis, have applied for different internships before really starting in hopefully my dream job. Um, and also working a bit in between already. Mm, so yeah, I decided to participate in a small private pauper tournament that has become more or less regular to my utter joy, of course, where we played with 8 people, so it was a clean 3 rounds of Swiss, and um, I had a suspicion what the let's say the local meta would look like. Um, by just, I mean, knowing some of the persons and what style of decks they like to play, but also because of the new cards out of Neon Dynasty, it was pretty clear that at least one person would be playing some kind of fairy strategy, and I was also expecting at least one affinity player, and actually in the first round I got placed against the one mono blue fairies player. In the second round, I played against the one affinity player. Honestly, I forgot if he even played blue cards or not, or if it was just rectors, or like if it was just red-black or also included blue. If you are watching this deck tech, you can, of course, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like you played some blue cards there. I feel like you drew 2 cards for 1 mana, but I'm not sure. So yeah, anyway, I got placed against that player in the second round, and in the third round I played against an off-meta deck that is probably the favorite deck of the guy playing it, who is a yeah, I would say good friend of mine, even though he's a bit special. Um, so yeah, Band Ephemerate probably not that big in the meta, but I think overall a good deck, very grindy deck with some, let's say, interesting win conditions and play patterns that luckily I um, I knew before what I was roughly uh, competing against. So yeah, the deck I decided to pick up on is Boros Kitty or Boros Monarch, but since I'm a boomer, like mentally at least regarding Pauper, I will keep calling it Boros Kitties, which is, I think, a name that stems from the very beginning of that deck in Pauper when Monarch wasn't even invented yet, at least not in Magic. So that deck combines some artifacts that give you card advantage when they enter the battlefield with some creatures who recur these artifacts back to hand, and then you can play them out again. Like, I guess, like a kitty playing with some wool, or I don't know, rolling it around. So you will be able to generate quite a bit of card advantage. And yeah, let's take a look at the deck and why I would say it's really, really strong in the meta, and strongly suggest for you to try it out. So let's look at the deck. Here we are with the deck, and in case you are a newer player and you are more accustomed to the new, let's say the new order, then you will know Lorehold as the instead of Boros, um, which communicates to you that we are playing white and red as colors, as you can see here. But yeah, the original um, thing was a guild back in Ravnica that was combining white and red, and that is Boros. And whereas Boros was more like, let's say, a stupid aggro thing, at least regarding game mechanics. Lorehold actually is much more in the spirit of this deck, in what the lore behind Lorehold is actually. Since, as far as I know, Lorehold is trying to be some like archaeologists who dig up some long forgotten like artifacts and enchantments, kind of regarding the game mechanics. And this is more what we are doing actually. So first of all, let's talk a bit about the lands, regarding some choices I made. Um, I decided to play quite a few tapped lands actually, because especially in the first turn, most of the time you are not doing much. Maybe bolting a fairy on turn 1, then you have to have untapped mana then, but otherwise you can most of the time start with a tapped land turn 1. You don't need to have untapped mana from turn 1 on. Turn 2 is enough. So we are running a playset of Rustvale Bridge and also a Lorehold Campus. The playset of Rustvale Bridge is due to the fact that we are profiting off of having lots of artifacts, of course opening us up to some hate, but I think that risk is overall worth it. So I picked up on a playset of Rustvale Bridge as well as Great Furnace and Ancient Den, and that's why we are not running too many basic lands, just 2 mountains and a plains, because it's like overall we need a bit more red mana than white mana, but at the start of the game white mana is also in need lots of the times. We want to bounce our artifacts with the white creatures, so we have to have at least 1 white mana, and we also have Thrame Inspector in the deck, so at least 1 plains should be in here. And then I have included 1 Ash Barrens in case like we desperately just need untapped mana, then Ash Barrens is good. In case we need filtering, then Ash Barrens can hit either the mountain or the plains, and we will have both colors available. Also, I decided to put in 1 Radiant Fountain for just some more or less random life gain, and then a couple of bounce lands that function well, not only with Ash Barrens and Radiant Fountain, because like imagine we had to play out Ash Barrens turn 2 because we wanted to play a 2 mana artifact, for example. But sometime later down the line we just want to have all the colored mana we can, and want to thin our library, then we can, for example, bounce Ash Barrens with Boros Garrison and search for a basic land. Even with the mana we can generate off of Ash Barrens before bouncing it. And yeah, obviously bouncing Radiant Fountain will give us a bit more life when we replay Radiant Fountain again. And then 1 Lorehold Campus for some scrying action in case we run out of hand cards, which is not too likely but can happen sometimes. And then at least you have a possible, like you have yeah, one possibility at least to scry a bit and to do a bit of top deck manipulation. So that much regarding the lands. We run quite a few artifacts that we, as I already explained, want to bounce to hand and replay them for lots of value. And those cards are the new edition Experimental Synthesizer, which I think in this deck is borderline broken. Because as you will see, most of our cards cost just 1 or 2 mana, so it's really likely we can just profitably cast anything or play a land drop we hit with Experimental Synthesizer, because the way Experimental Synthesizer is worded, it says when it enters or leaves the battlefield, so it doesn't just say when it dies or like goes into the graveyard from play. It just says when it enters or leaves the battlefield, we exile the top card of our library, and then until end of turn we may play that card. So it doesn't say we can cast it, it says we can play it, and that means we can also play our land drop from exile if we hit a land with the Synthesizer. And also, in case we don't have any sacrifice outlet or creature to bounce it back, it has some built-in sacrifice condition in that we can pay 3 mana and sacrifice it at sorcery speed, mind, but still, to create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance. So really strong card, especially again in this kind of shell. And then apart from the Synthesizer, we have 2 golden eggs and 4 Echo Wellsprings. Echo Wellspring is a pretty obvious inclusion in this kind of deck, where we also have some sacrifice outlets, because when it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we get to draw cards. So essentially, over the course of the game, this is at least 2 mana, draw 2 cards, which is really, really great. And in between, it gives us some more synergies and probably even some more card draw. And then we also have Golden Egg. Here you might as well try to run like Wedding Invitation or maybe Spare Supplies. But I felt like we don't need some creature to connect in one turn unblocked, because none of our creatures have power higher than 2. Which would be good with Wedding Invitation if we had a big creature, but we don't, because it makes a creature unblockable for one turn when we sacrifice it. Or we could play Spare Supplies, which enters the battlefield tapped, and like Echo Wellspring costs 2 mana and draws a card on ETB. And we can pay 2 colorless, sacrifice it, like tap it and sacrifice it, and we draw a card. Excuse me. But again, I don't feel like we need that additional card advantage. We have quite a lot already, because for all of these artifacts, we can easily bounce them to hand with either Glinthawk or Core Skyfisher. Glinthawk specifically caring about artifacts, so in case we have to get it out, we can also bounce back a land, an artifact land that we have, for example. And if we don't have a land drop, we can kind of cheat on mana with Glinthawk or Core Skyfisher, because Core Skyfisher says return a permanent you control to its owner's hand, which is potentially, if we don't have anything better to do, also of course a synergy with Radiant Fountain to gain some more life. But most likely we want to return any of these 10 artifacts here to our hand, or maybe even Thraben Inspector, which of course also generates card advantage, because when it enters a battlefield it investigates and we get a clue token that we can sacrifice to draw a card. So you can have some slower starts where you are just putting out some lands, waiting for your synergies to kick in with Echo Wellspring or a profitable experimental Synthesizer turn, return those to hand with Glinthawk or Core Skyfisher. But we can also have more classically aggressive turns with turn 1 Thraben Inspector, turn 2 Core Skyfisher, return Inspector. So that's one of the things that makes the deck so interesting, is that you can fit in either the role of being a more control-y and grinding deck, but you can also go into the offensive if the opponent doesn't really commit to the board. Then you will have some more or less random hitters to really get to the opponent. So yeah, Core Skyfisher also able to bounce Thraben Inspector apart from the card advantage artifacts, let's say. Also able, by the way, to reset Journey to Nowhere if we hit a smaller creature with it earlier, and now we can handle that smaller creature, but a greater threat is out there, then we can bounce a Journey with a Core Skyfisher entering the battlefield and then replay it and get rid of the bigger threat. Also, what we could do if needed is, let's say we have put out Palace Sentinels and unexpectedly our opponent was able to connect with a creature, so they took away the monarch from us. That would otherwise draws a card um, each of our end steps. So again, more card advantage because we need it apparently. Um, so yeah, with Core Skyfisher you can also reset the monarch again by bouncing Palace Sentinels and replaying it. I don't think it comes up often, but I just want to make sure that I communicate all the possibilities this deck has. Like, it's not that complex in its play patterns, I think. So you should at least be aware of the play patterns there are, so you can play the deck optimally. So that's about the let's say kitty creatures, our overall our creature base. Um, in addition to that, we have some kill spells in the aforementioned Journey to Nowhere and also Galvanic Blast and Lightning Bolt. So Lightning Bolt, just a classic magic card and also Pauper card, of course, in just dealing 3 damage to any target. Very good early game removal. Journey to Nowhere, good throughout the game, able to hit any target creature. And Gulf Blast, also very nice here because, as you see, we are running 12 artifact lands, also running 10 more artifacts in the Synthesizer, Golden Eggs and Wellsprings, and also we shouldn't forget that Thraben Inspector also creates an artifact token in the clue token. So it's pretty likely that Galvanic Blast will be turned on very early on, and we can just deal 4 damage to any target for 1 red mana. So we have very good efficient removal from red and also a bit from white, and we are combining these colorless and red artifacts with our white creatures for card advantage. But there's some more reason than just the removal to also go red in this kind of deck, and that reasons are Makeshift Munitions, which is a great card. It has been a great card since it got downshifted into the Pauper format, but with the meta shift going much more even towards Faeries probably, and especially mono blue, Makeshift Munitions is a game changer in that matchup. When you can resolve it and protect it, you will probably win the game off of it alone. Um, like, of course, only if you are not running out of stuff to sacrifice. But it's pretty likely that some artifacts and some artifact lands are lying out there ready to be sacrificed. So yeah, Makeshift Munitions, 2 mana red enchantment, and for 1 colorless mana, and sacrificing an artifact or creature, we can deal 1 damage to any target. So we can really machine gun down some small creatures, which is relevant in the Fairy matchup as well as the Affinity matchup, because the most likely way for Affinity to win is either with Glaze Fiend, which on our turn we can most likely just kill, because then it's a 0/1, or with a combination of 1 or more, what's it called? Disciple of the Vault plus Kraglan Shaman, just sacrificing all their artifacts and dealing us tons of damage, even though probably we have a couple of blockers out or have their bigger threats removed, like Myr Enforcers, for example. And Makeshift Munitions kills all of these because they are 1/1s or respectively 0/1s. So that's why Makeshift Munitions is, I think, really great as a meta call and overall a really good card in this deck, in that it presents a permanent sacrifice outlet that we can also use to just finish the game. It gives us additional reach, even more than we already have with Galvanic Blast and Lightning Bolt, because all of these can go face if needed. And apart from Makeshift Munitions, we also are able to sacrifice most likely Echo Wellspring, but also maybe sometimes Experimental Synthesizer with Kuldota Rebirth, where we just pay 1 red mana for 3 1/1 red goblins, but as an additional cost we have to sacrifice an artifact when casting this spell. And the interesting thing is that in some matchup these 1/1 tokens are just good jump blockers, for example against the bigger affinity creatures. In some matchups, they allow us to be the aggressor if we, like, for example, hit a Glinthawk or cause Skyfisher early on together with sacrificing Echo Wellspring or Experimental Synthesizer with Kuldota Rebirth, and like we might have 5 power turn 3, which is not too bad considering that we are also generating huge amounts of card advantage and are also able to cover most creatures the opponents might play out with our Journey to Nowhere, Gulf Blast, and Lightning Bolt. So, and also these cards are flyers, which you shouldn't underestimate as well. So that's why I would really recommend the deck, or I do in fact recommend the deck. It gives you so much flexibility in how you control the opponent's board, how you progress your own board, what role you want to be in a matchup, like if you want to control them, control their board, if you just want to go to be the aggressor early on and then like stall the game and at some point just burn them out with Gulf Blast, Lightning Bolt, and Makeshift Munitions. And along the way, like for example, jump block with the Goblin tokens and then sacrifice them into Makeshift Munitions, because Makeshift Munitions doesn't only care about artifacts, it can also use creatures as munition, especially fitting with goblins, of course. So that way you have lots of reach. Also, of course, with Thraim Inspector bringing along a clue token. And sometimes you don't need the additional card advantage from the clue, and then you can sacrifice that also into Makeshift Munitions. And also you can sacrifice all your artifact lands into Makeshift Munitions if needed, if you are flooding out, if you just need the last couple of damage. So that way you have, like, you get so much out of this card in so many different ways. It synergizes so well with the Wellspring, with the Synthesizer, and the Synthesizer in this deck is really, really strong. Like it's so likely that you hit 2 cards out of this that you can play and or cast right away. Even if you hit nothing too good to like bounce the Synthesizer or anything, you can just sacrifice it, you get a 2/2 and even more card advantage. Like you dig through so much of your deck in each and every game that for example Palace Sentinels, there's no need to really play more than one. I did in fact decide to play, or like to put in a second copy of Makeshift Munitions because even though the second copy of course doesn't give you any advantage over having just one out there, but it's so crucial to hit this card in some matchups to, for example, already decide game 1 in your favor and then really take over with your sideboard cards. Speaking of which, here are our sideboard options. Here we are. And these are geared mainly towards beating what I identified as the most meta decks, namely the ones I was playing against in the first couple of rounds, Faeries and Affinity. And here you can see we have, against Faeries especially, we have Electrickery, Fiery Cannonade, both really good and efficient mass removals in this matchup. electrically killing nearly everything, especially when they are not running Delvas um, and not running Spire Golems, which not all of the decks do, I think. Maybe even most of them don't, honestly. You kill everything except for Ninja of the Deep Hours, and Fiery Cannonade kills everything in that deck apart from Spire Golem. And again, Spire Golem needs quite a few turns to get out, and until then you should have drawn some efficient answers like Gulf Blast, Journey, have a Core Skyfisher out that can block it, and so on and so on. So Electricity and Fiery Cannonade, insane in these matchups. Of course, also good in some other aggressive creature-based matchups. But especially here, these cards really shine. And also I decided to put in, let's say, a split playset of Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast. You can, of course, just run a 4 of any of these, but I decided to split them in order to not reveal too much information, because if an opponent sees that we are like, let's say game 2, they see we are playing 3 Red Elemental Blasts, then they can probably figure out we have maybe 3 or 4 Red Elemental Blasts in the deck. If they see 2 Red Elemental Blasts and 1 Pyroblast, it's also likely that we might have, let's say, 4 Red Elemental Blasts and some more copies of Pyroblasts, or a 3-3 split or anything. So this doesn't reveal as much information and keeps the opponent guessing on what exactly, like how many answers exactly we do have. So I decided to split here. And another matchup that we can really flip in our favor after sideboarding is Affinity. Since we have some brains to handle any artifact, or at least handle any non-destructible artifact, we have a copy of Gorilla Shaman, which, even though now these affinity decks tend to play much more of the indestructible tap lands since they are out, they are still running quite a few of the untapped original artifact lands, and Gorilla Shaman can just eat these for 1 mana because they are non-creature artifacts with mana value 0. So you only have to pay 1 mana to destroy land, which is pretty good, I would say. And then I decided to also put in 2 Revoke Existence. Also especially good, of course, against affinity deck lists, being able to exile any artifact or enchantment. This can also take care of the tap lands, it can take care of Mu Enforcer and so on. So with the mixture of Gorilla Shaman, Revoke Existence, and Abrade, we can really hate on the affinity lands, but we can also kill some, let's say, like reinforcers, or we have additional answers to Glaze Fiend and so on. So yeah, really good hate cards. Of course, we could in this spot also run Dust to Dust, but Revoke Existence is a bit more flexible, and you might run into some matchups where you want to have at least a few answers to some enchantments like Pestilence, for example, which can be a huge nuisance for this deck, because actually when we don't get to stick any creatures to the battlefield and then they just kill us with Guardian of the Guild Pact that we can't really interact with, we might die before we can draw enough direct damage to kill them. So yeah, Revoke Existence is good here. And then I decided to also put in a couple of Lone Missionaries, like a 2-mana 2/1, being able to gain 4 life when it enters the battlefield, and also most likely at some point when we draw Lone Missionary, we will also have a Core Skyfisher at hand. Where's my mouse? So we can bounce the Lone Missionary and gain even more life. Also maybe we gain some life with Radiant Fountain and Boros Garrison, and these make some very aggressive or especially burn strategies look worse by far, of course. Um, if I would expect to run into more burn, then I would stock up on Lone Missionary. I think burn might be a strategy that um, could be seen more depending on where the meta goes and depending on where the next bans go. But for now, I mean, you can just play a couple of Lone Missionaries because I think burn isn't favored against fairies, probably never was, and even less so as of now. And yeah, Lone Missionary, as I said, again, most likely you will bring it in against burn. If you think that you are most likely just facing affinity and fairy strategies, and you are confident then that you can beat some other random decks, and for example also elf decks with the likes of Electricary, Fiery Cannonade, and maybe even some more Abrades in the sideboard, then you can of course also replace the Lone Missionaries with a few Dust to Dust, or even Revoke Existence and Lone Missionary with 4 Dust to Dust. And then you should really be good to go against these matchups. So yeah, and that's why I said I think this deck is really good in the meta. The sideboard options are great against some of the most meta decks, and the main board is already giving you lots of interaction, card advantage. You are able to proactively sculpt the game. You can also react to a more aggressive opponent. You have some life gain in even in the main deck in Radiant Fountain and Golden Egg, of course, which I forgot to mention, and then even a bit more with Lone Missionary. So it's not that likely actually that you die to aggressive decks, um, be it burn or especially creature strategies, because you can easily answer these with all your efficient removal, jump blockers, and also of course makeshift munitions. So that's why I really suggest you try out this deck. Since I only have limited time, I will not show you some gameplay. um, this is already the improved deck list from my experience that I had playing this deck in 3 matches um, a few days ago. And yeah, if you want to see some gameplay, let me know. But also, I think it's not that hard to find someone playing a strategy like this, even though there are a couple of people um, that are playing like a version that is white and black with a similar idea, of course. But I feel like this deck is much better because of makeshift munitions mainly, and also, of course, the burn spells giving you direct reach, giving you such an efficient way of interacting, and even Kuldota Rebirth, I think, is pretty good, giving you more material for makeshift munitions, giving you some more um, early game agency, let's say. And even though a white blacklist can, for example, run Pestilence and be maybe over the longer game be a bit more grindy, stuff like Experimental Synthesizer makes this deck compete in that direction. And again, I think the advantages in going white and red are just so high that you probably rather want to pick up on white red instead of white black with this kind of deck, even though the play styles can be pretty similar depending on the matchup. So, um, when I find some time, I will do some more gameplay. Maybe not of this deck though, because again, as I said, it's not too fancy in how you play out this kind of deck. It's overall well established since years, so you can also watch someone like from 3 years ago play a deck similar to this, and you get an idea of how you play it. You just have to know how to play with the new cards, and I trust you to figure that out. And so yeah, if I will bring some gameplay alongside a deck tech, it will probably be a bit more of a spicy deck, which I hope to be able to present to you until maybe next week. when I find time between my bachelor thesis and work and so on. But yeah, let's see what I can do. I hope you have a good time. Really suggest you try out this deck or a deck list like this. Until next time, goodbye, Wiedersehen.